There are many reasons why it's definitely better to learn the language of the country in which you live. To begin with, practical reasons. If you want to, let's say, enjoy the Italian culture and be part of it in some way, you need to be at least able to communicate by using the Italian language.
This is Italian for Sure, the podcast about Italian culture. I'm your host, Catrin Skaperdas, an American living in Italy, and I interview Italians who passionately share their wisdom, stories, and insights about Italian culture. Ciao, Roberto.
Ciao,
Thank
Catrin.
you for joining Italian for Sure.
It's a pleasure.
So happy to have you here. If you could start by introducing yourself, maybe you can tell us where you're from in Italy, and then also where we are today.
My name is Roberto. My family comes from the middle of the country. I was born in Milan and I've been living here since then. Milan is located in the north of the country. As you probably know, Italy is divided into regions, 21 regions. We are in a region called Lombardia. Milan is well known practically throughout the world for being one of the cities of fashion and design, as you probably know. But there are many other reasons why it deserves to be discovered and visited. For example, it's a very proactive city. There are good job opportunities, for example, and an excellent educational offer. Let's say somehow it combines the conveniences of a big city with the comfort of a small one. So, for example, if you live and work in the center of Milan, you don't need any transport, actually. You can walk everywhere. It's safe for despite being a large city. But I don't want to sound too much marketing oriented. So if you want, we can consider also the disadvantages of living in Milan. For example, it's expensive. At times the weather can be annoying, cold in winter and hot and humid in summer. It might be difficult to make friends, and especially if you are not an extrovert. I'm not, for example. So if you want to make friends, you need to join a context, any context, a workforce, a school, etc. So this is more or less Milan.
I really relate to a lot of what you said after living here for almost 2 years now. Being from New York, I'm not from New York City, but I've spent lots of time in New York City. I'm 45 minutes outside by train. And Milan does offer a big city, meaning it has lots to do and see, but the comforts of community and kind of this neighborhood feel. That's actually often how I describe Milan in my experience in this city.
Good.
So that's...
You agree with me?
Yeah, I agree with you. And you're the person who's from here. So I really appreciate you sharing all of that. Thankfully, I have not had the trouble of making friends.
Good.
People have been so nice and kind and welcoming and opening. So I've been really thankful and grateful for that experience.
Probably you are more extrovert than me.
Maybe, I don't know. I am quite an extroverted person. But one of the ways that's made it easier to make friends is by learning Italian, or trying to at least, which I have done at your school. And that's where we are today. I was wondering if you can tell me more about why you opened this school. Can you tell me more about this school that you run with your wife, I believe?
Good question. Good question. Thanks for this question, because it makes me feel younger. We have been teaching Italian for approximately 30 years. So when we founded the school, we were young. And the world was completely different, not fully globalized yet. It was not even connected. The internet was a longing, and if not pure science fiction. You can imagine we are the generation that grew up on the fault line between two different worlds. We have seen our communities becoming multicultural, getting used to foreign languages, and changing their habits, even food habits. So we were fascinated by this process at that time. And we decided to do something possibly useful and practical to participate in this process, to contribute to it. And this was definitely a strong motivation to start teaching the Italian language, Italian as a foreign language, alongside, of course, our interest in teaching. So we started as volunteers, and after a couple of years, we founded the school, and teaching Italian as a foreign language became a full-time job.
It's a beautiful story. And I love that there's kind of a mission behind it. It wasn't simply a business to make money. There's actually a core mission behind it.
At the beginning, I could even imagine that it could be a real job.
Wow. And it is. And you are helping so many students like me. I've learned a lot at your school.
Hopefully.
No, really. I've been to a few other schools in Milan. I won't name them, but yours is by far the best, truly.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I've been coming to your school to learn Italian now for a little while, and I've met a lot of foreigners in Milan, and specifically Milan probably because I've met foreigners who have gotten away with not learning Italian, who have gotten away on mostly native English speakers. And they're able to, you know, live in Italy, some for 5-7 years, never learning Italian and just using their English. For me, it was just important that I did learn the native language of where I'm living, mostly because I am calling this home now. And the more that I learn the language, the more I'm able to understand the culture and the more I'm able to feel at home here. But what are your thoughts on that about foreigners who maybe make the choice not to learn Italian? And, you know, do you suggest that they do, and why?
Well, of course, I definitely agree with you. Learning Italian is the right thing to do, and not just because this is my job. It's true that in Milan you can get by without speaking any Italian because now it's completely international. But of course, there are many reasons why it's definitely better to learn the language of the country in which you live. For example, to begin with practical reasons. It's very likely that you sometimes find yourself having to face situation where speaking Italian is good for you. You know, it makes your life easier. And if not, prevent you from getting into trouble. If you were dealing with the Italian bureaucracy, you would probably know what I'm talking about. You
Absolutely.
didn't you?
Yes. Italian bureaucracy is a headache, but I guess bureaucracy anywhere is a headache.
In a democratic way, it doesn't matter if you are a foreigner or Italian, it's exactly the same.
That's good to know. The frustration is not discriminatory.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But there are also good reasons to learn the language. If you want to, let's say, enjoy the Italian culture and be part of it in some way, you need to be at least able to communicate by using the Italian language. No, if you don't want to be just, let's say, a distant and silent observer of the culture, so learning Italian is important. Now, I can barely imagine how life can be if you spend your day surrounded by people whose language is a mystery to you. And it doesn't matter where you live. It might be Italy or any other country, right?
I can speak to that because when I started to actually understand Italian well enough that the sounds around me were no longer just sounds.
Exactly.
And they were actually words. It changed everything. You know, I was kind of walking through white noise all of the time. And now I actually hear conversations and I can communicate and talk to strangers, which is something that I am an extrovert. I do like to meet people. So it makes a difference.
We see every day how our students, let's say, get benefits from their learning. For example, just to give a few examples, they make friends, they get a job. No, they can find a job at sometimes not any job, but the job that they want to make a living with, or they visibly enjoy the pleasure and of learning a language for the rest of their life. So this is an everyday experience.
Absolutely. So Italian has been a hard language for me to learn, but I say that never having learned any other language. Admittedly, I did take French in high school. I've mentioned that in another episode as well, that I learned French for 5 years, but I can't say anything more than I love you and my name is. So Italian is the first language that I'm truly learning. And well, first of all, when I first came to this country and I was trying to practice while learning, because I came here not knowing anything, not knowing more than ciao, not knowing how to say 1 through 10, the numbers 1 through 10. But it was COVID. It was, right after the pandemic we started to be able to go out and communicate, but everyone was wearing masks. And let me tell you, trying to learn a language when people are speaking behind masks, even when people are speaking English with the masks, sometimes I'm like, I'm sorry, can you repeat yourself? In Italian, that was extremely difficult.
You were not lucky.
No, that was not a good time. Well, that was not a good time for anyone, but it was not a good time to learn a new language for sure. And I've noticed, my comprehension is coming first before my ability to speak, mostly probably due to my fear of speaking. And, my fiance speaks to me in Italian and I respond in English. And I guess I'm wondering if you could talk about that. Do you notice that with other students that it's more common for comprehension to come first, or is that, do you think, specific to me? What's kind of the normal flow of learning Italian?
That's the normal flow. So I'm not surprised that your comprehension came before, the other skills, writing, reading, etc. This is exactly how it works. Comprehension comes before. So this is normal. And when you are learning a language, what you do, learning a language is about developing a certain set of skills, reading, writing, speaking, and etc. And each skills involves some components, such as, for example, grammar and vocabulary. But I've never seen in my life any student with all the skills perfectly balanced. No, this is humanly impossible. So each student is better at some skills and worse at some others. But this doesn't depend on whether you are American or French or Italian, it doesn't depend either on which your first language is. No, it's pretty much a personal thing. It depends on your background and not just your educational background. It depends on your attitude, the effort you make to improve yourself. Let's say in general, your attitude towards the daily life.
That's good advice. Patience and commitment.
Is it your experience?
It is my experience. I have been told not to translate. So I translate sentences in my mind. And I've been told, try not to translate, try to just think of what you want to say and then try to say it. And also because, English and Italian or other Latin-rooted languages are not structured the same way. They're structured completely different. So It's hard to translate.
But I understand your attitude, and this is absolutely normal. I mean, you need to start from somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
No? So this is absolutely normal.
Thank you.
That's another phase.
Okay.
But it's not your phase any longer, I hope.
I feel much more confident speaking now than I did in the beginning. Of course, it's taken me time, but that has just come after practicing speaking. One of the things that I found most difficult while learning Italian is the double consonants. 3 words I know that have different meanings, but sound and are written very similarly. And you're going to tell me if these are correct, but papa, and papa. And there's like accents and tones, and one of those has 2 P's and one of them has a capital P. And those are 3 different words. One's the Pope, one's father, what you call your dad, and one is like baby food. Is that correct? It is.
No, good pronunciation. Papa.
Grazie. But those, now I can hear the difference a little bit better now that it's been a little bit of learning. But in the beginning, if you had said that to me, I would have said, what was the difference between the 3 things you just said?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it took a little time not to get used to it.
One of the more easy things I found about the Italian language is the Italian alphabet. So I am a fan of rules when it comes to learning a language, because it's so simple when you tell me, okay, if it's a C followed by an I or an E, it makes more of a ch sound, a chi or che, versus if there is an H after, it's ki or ke. Having been around Italian words, because there's a lot of Italian words that did make it to America with immigration, people don't often pronounce those words correctly or the Italian pronunciation. But now that I know the rules, it's so hard to go back and pronounce words the way I used to pronounce them, like bruschetta instead of bruschetta, because I know the rules. But I love the rules. I love them so much because in English, we have words like Pacific Ocean, as an example, first comes to mind. The 3 C's in Pacific Ocean have a different sound. And I don't know why. Maybe someone can tell you why, but I would guess that the majority of Americans probably cannot tell you why Pacific Ocean, the 3 C's have a different sound, whereas in Italian, there are these rules. Have you found that having those rules has helped foreigners learn Italian?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
No, it's much easier when you can get by the rules. Learning is much easier. No, at least you know how to do, right? But sometimes there is not any rule. Sometimes,
The exceptions. Oh
the
gosh.
exceptions. So maybe let's say it doesn't exist any specific logic for learning a language.
And I know people who have learned languages, they tell me through Netflix and through listening to music and never knowing the rules. And they just pick up a foreign language. And I am so envious of people who can do that. I need the rules.
Yes, but normally they are not correct when they speak Italian. No, because you need to know the rule, and it's impossible to learn the Italian language or any other Latin language without knowing the rule. I mean, speak accurately, correctly.
Yeah.
So your way is better, in my opinion.
Spoken from my Italian teacher, so I believe it. Thank you. Something I feel really grateful for is that I know how to roll my R's. I've noticed that there are people who are trying to learn Italian and they can't roll their R's. And I hear that creates some difficulty for them. So I will say for that, I've been told my pronunciation is, not bad, I guess, because I'm understanding the rules of the alphabet, as we talked about. I can roll my R's. So while I can't understand everything or speak, say what I want to say, I can roll my R's. But I have been told, actually, one letter that I've been told I need to work on my pronunciation with is my O, the letter O at the end of words. So I've gotten a little better, but I don't know why food always comes to mind, like prosciutto. But the O at the end, I used to be very strong, like prosciutto and ragazzo. And I would close my mouth so much. And I was told that I need to leave it a little bit open.
But normally when my English native speaker students try to pronounce the final O of a word, normally the O lasts longer than it normally does. So try to pronounce my name.
Roberto.
Perfect.
Okay. No, I've practiced.
Perfect. Because normally it's Roberto.
Right.
Roberto. Good.
Well, I'm glad to know I'm not the only native English speaker that did that, because that is definitely something I struggled with. Practicing the pronunciation is just as important as practicing the words.
Yes, it is.
As we talked about before, there are a lot of Italian words that have made their way to the US due to immigration. Words like, and again, I'm always thinking about food, but biscotti, panini, cannoli. And these words have a different meaning in America. And I always find it very interesting to talk to Italians about this because, for example, a panini in America is like this hot pressed sandwich, very specific sandwich, where panini in Italian just means sandwiches, correct? Okay. Yes. And I don't know why, it's always the plural form. So cannoli is actually the same, but cannolo in Italian is a singular cannolo. Cannoli is plural. In America, we say cannoli for one. So we would add our apostrophe S, or S, we would say cannolis, two cannolis, 3 cannolis. But the biscotti one was the most interesting one that I had learned about. So biscotti in America is a cantucci cookie. Mm-hmm. So it's the cookie from Tuscany.
Yes.
And in America, that's biscotti. But in Italian, biscotti is just cookies, correct? Just plural for cookies. Yes. Have there been other Italian words that while you've maybe traveled to America or other countries that you've heard that the meaning is not exactly the same meaning as it is in Italian?
Not many, actually. The only one I can think of right now is the word confetti. Confetti are kind of sweets, candies we have at special occasions, such as wedding, for example. But if I remember correctly, it means something completely different in the US, also in UK. Am I correct?
I would describe confetti as little cut pieces of paper that get thrown around. I know here there's, Carnevale, which I guess we probably don't have enough time to get into on this episode, but the kids throw around confetti. So to me, it's like these little pieces of paper that are colorful and get thrown around.
So completely different.
Completely different.
Yes,
They're not candy. They're not edible.
Exactly. But it is very funny. There are a lot of words imported from other languages. And they became actually something completely different. So I'm not surprised. We are even more creative. We even make up English words in the Italian language. We really think they are English words, but they are not. Zapping is to change continuously channel while watching TV. Because you cannot decide what you want to watch.
Zapping,
exactly.
What about what you call Englishsisms? I noticed there's a lot of them in Italy, where it's like smart working. So smart working.
Oh, there are a lot of words. Words we don't have in the Italian language, such as sport, for example. This is an English word. It doesn't exist an equivalent in the Italian language. Sometimes we have Italian words to say something, but we prefer to use English words, marketing. Let me think.
Well, smart working, because we call it remote working, and I do remote working. And then when I heard someone describe what I do as smart working, I was like, oh, well, I like to think of myself as smart. So I'll start saying smart working, but we don't say smart working.
How do you say in the US, smart working or remote working?
Remote. Yeah, no, smart working is not an English term. That's made in Italy. That's a made in Italy term. But it's a fun one. It's a very fun one. And marketing was nice for me because I do marketing. And so when I was learning, how do I say what I do? And the teacher said, well, I have to say it with the accent, marketing. But I do marketing. So, and I do podcast marketing, or would I say marketing the podcast?
It might happen that they don't understand postcard. But marketing is a quite familiar word.
I have had to explain what a podcast is.
Yes.
And it's also true that with foreign words, at least with English words, I know, like sport or podcast, you don't make the word plural. You keep it singular, even if you're saying it in a plural case.
True,
it's
yes.
true?
Yes, true. Yes, exactly. Sport is considered to be an Italian word by now. So this is the habit. We never put the S to say the word in the plural form, because we consider the word like an Italian word, but it's not. So actually, it doesn't exist any plural for imported words.
Yeah. I found that very interesting.
Computer. The pronunciation has to be strictly Italian. Computer. One computer. Due computer.
Always singular, like always computer, no computers. Very interesting. As I mentioned before, learning Italian has helped me make Italy feel like home, but also has just truly helped me. So I am actually looking to buy an apartment. And when I was looking at apartments, I would see trilocale, bilocale. And at first, because B buys 2, 3 is I'm 3, I thought that was 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. And it only was in Italian class when we were doing that chapter that I learned that it's 2-room, which includes the living room. So for an English speaker, that would be a 1-bedroom. So it was so confusing until Italian class taught me. So that's correct. It's bilocale is like 2 rooms, and one of those rooms includes the living room.
Yes. Well, it's nice to hear that our classes were helpful to you.
Definitely.
Yes, true. Yes, but there are a lot of situations in which you learn from the daily life how the language works.
And that's another thing. Textbook Italian sometimes is different than the Italian that I hear out in life. For example, the first one that you learn in school is usually mi chiamo and then your name. So my name is mi chiamo Catrin. But in Italy, I've never once heard anyone say mi chiamo and then their name. They always say sono, or they just say their name. So if I'm meeting somebody, they might just say, I might say Catrin and then piacere. Can you think of other examples of Italian phrases or words that, you have to teach in the classroom, but maybe are not as commonly used?
So let's say our ultimate goal, final goal, is to help students be independent in the daily life, not to express themselves clearly in the daily life, in the real life. But in order to do this, we cannot base our teaching only ever on the colloquial version of the language. No, because if our teaching was completely oriented towards the daily spoken Italian, we would not be able to provide them with all the necessary skills to speak Italian correctly and accurately. And mi chiamo is a good example, because it's true that mi chiamo is not strictly necessary if you want to introduce yourself. But once you know how mi chiamo works, and the grammar implied in it, you can easily move towards other more popular and easier way to introduce yourself, but be at the same time able to ask for someone else's name. Mm-hmm. Because ti chiami, which is your name is, mi chiamo, my name is, ti chiami, your name is widely used to ask for someone else's name. And that's why we have to, combine the official language with the spoken language. And this is one of the most difficult part of teaching, actually.
Absolutely. Another one that comes to mind is arrivo. So I noticed that at restaurants, they'll always say when they're going to be right back. So maybe they see you sit down and they're helping another customer. And before they come to the table, they're like, arrivo, arrivo. Now, in Italian, literally, it means I arrive.
Yes.
But they're not actually arriving. The meaning is I'll be right back. Or
yes.
Sometimes it's arrivo subito. Yes. I'll be right back. But the literal translation is
arrivo, yes.
I arrive.
I arrive, yes. The message is completely different.
Yeah.
But it's not to make the enemies confused. This is a normal attitude in the language. I'm sure you have a lot of words in English working exactly in the same way. You say something, but you mean something else. No?
Oh, too many. Exactly. I feel bad, actually, for people who are learning English.
So it's normal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And this is exactly what you learn much easier from the daily life rather than in the classroom, actually. But it's impossible to teach all the words we say by meaning something else. Impossible.
Of course. Have you found that your Spanish-speaking students pick up Italian faster? I know that Spanish and Italian are very similar, but having some native Spanish speakers in my class, there was a sense of ease because some things were the same, but then there was a sense of difficulty because some things were the same. And so it was almost confusing to differentiate. They knew which one, obviously, which was Spanish, but sometimes there was confusion, I think, in the mind of when they're speaking Spanish and Italian because they're so similar. Do you find that you've seen students progress faster when they're Spanish native speakers?
Yeah, of course. Italian and Spanish are very similar each other. So especially at the very beginning, the learning process, they learn faster than other students coming from different languages. But progressively, along the learning process, they might have problems to distinguish the two languages. And if they don't decide to really be committed and study the Italian language and not just assume Italian from Spanish, they actually take the risk not to learn. They have to decide to learn and to apply the rules, to start to memorize the rules and to apply them when they speak, when they read, etc., writing. It's easier at the beginning, but it becomes more difficult as long as they go through the learning process. So they have to be committed at a certain point. They have to decide to really learn the language. So it's true.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense. And if you're living in Italy, it might not just be Italian that you want to learn. I've learned that there are dialects of each region. You mentioned actually, and it's a question. You mentioned 21 regions, and I've noticed that some Italians say 21 regions. But if you look it up online, it'll say 20 regions. Do you know why?
Well, if I remember correctly, because they don't consider Trentino, Alto Adige two different reasons.
Ah, okay.
That's why, but they are actually.
They are.
They
okay.
are actually. Yes, one of the two is quite independent. So they actually are two different reasons.
I recently went on a trip to that region that you mentioned. I went to call a restaurant and make a reservation, which I'm very comfortable doing now in Italian. And I was surprised when they picked up and spoke German. I was wondering actually if you could give kind of a short summary of why there's a part of Italy where they predominantly speak German as well as Italian, and I believe also dialect and English. I think most people there speak four languages.
But as you probably know, history of Italy is quite complicated because Italy became a nation in the 19th century. And it used to be actually divided into different states, independent with a common historical background, and to have a common language, it took even longer. We reached a common language in the 20th century, actually. But so this is a very long and partly controversial story. But dialects are still important in Italy. Yes, and actually, it's when they are not spoken actually in all the regions. For example, in Milan, there are people still able to speak the local dialect, but not so many, just a few people. But in some regions, the dialect is really important. It's a kind of second language. So yes, I mean, the end about Trentino Alto Adige, they are supposed to be bilingual. So Italian and German at the same time. So I'm not surprised about the experience you had there. Yes. But actually, the German local people are normally able to speak Italian, but not always the opposite. So I know Italian people not able to speak German, but normally the German people are able to speak Italian.
So Roberto, this has been so lovely talking with you. I was wondering if you could give us your best tips and recommendations for learning Italian.
Okay, so let's start with some tips for the ones who don't live in Italy. I suggest for the ones who have no direct contact with the language. In that case, I suggest attending a language course to grasp the basics of the language and to have a basis to work on later. So it's important to have a guideline, at least at the beginning. Then, to improve understanding and vocabulary, it's definitely an excellent idea to take advantage of all the resources offered by the internet. Films, series, songs, readings, etc. And if I may give a further piece of advice, I would suggest being patient. Not forgetting that learning is a process, it's divided in phases, and if you want to get something done in the end, you need to be patient. Actually, not stress yourself. So have the right expectations, be patient, and don't stress yourself, because stressing is a waste of time and energy. And learning should be always a pleasure. For the ones living in Italy, I think you are in a better position to provide piece of advices, right? To advise tips, because you are living in Italy and you continually have this experience.
Yeah, living in the place of where they speak the language that you're trying to learn, it definitely helps because I learn through my real experiences. So whether that's calling a restaurant and making a reservation, or showing up at that restaurant and saying, hi, I have a reservation. I don't know why all of my examples are food related, but, anything, going into any sort of establishment, store, and having to talk to a person and ask for what you need or ask for help, or, and then of course, also just talking to people that you meet. So making friends and asking them where they're from, and, talking to them about various things, these real life conversations and the real life practice, for me, I think is why I've picked up Italian so much faster. And I actually can speak some Italian, even though it's been less than 2 years, in comparison to learning French for 5 years or by textbook in a classroom, but never having really a chance to practice it outside of that 1 hour class every 3 days of the week. So definitely living somewhere, and I know it's not always possible, but it definitely helps to learn the language.
But it's possible to learn the language also if you don't live in the country where the language is spoken. It takes more time. You need to be more committed. Maybe you need to make a bigger effort to learn the language, but it's possible.
Definitely, especially as you mentioned now with the internet, there's a lot of opportunities to Zoom or, FaceTime with
absolutely
native speakers, from across the world. Well, thank you so much for this interview, Roberto. It was so lovely chatting with you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. This is Italian for Sure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian for Sure. If you liked what you heard, make sure to hit the follow button wherever you listen to podcasts, and hit the subscribe button on YouTube. If you want to connect, find me on Instagram and TikTok at Italian for Sure, and let me know what you found most interesting. Until next time.